Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. So just excuse my voice, it's a little bit off because I've been sick, but I'm feeling much better now and I'm ready to start making videos again. So today I wanted to do a little time capsule-y kind of video where we talk about all of the translated books that I currently own, and I'll talk through the ones I've read, the ones I'm excited about, etc., language of origin, all of that. But in the past year, I have gotten into translated literature. I first picked up a translated book, I think December of 2020 actually. It was A Man Called Uva, but I didn't even really think about it being translated. And then in March of 2021, I bought a lot of translated books and really fell in love with the genre. It's not really a genre, it's a category, but whatever. But now the entire top shelf of my bookshelf is translated literature, so it has taken over a large chunk of my reading. So I thought it would be fun to just go over all of the translated books that I own, and I can look back on this and see how it's changed and all of that. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So this is going to be by language of origin. So the first language of origin on my shelf is Spanish. My top shelf is actually organized by language of origin, not by author, last name, or anything like that. But the first one on my shelf is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So I got this as a Christmas present in 2020, and I decided I wanted to read it pretty soon in 2021. So I read this in March, I believe, when I was doing a translated literature vlog. And this is the illustrated edition. It's just absolutely beautiful, but it has all of these beautiful illustrations inside, and it is a massive book. I ended up reading a lot of this on audio and then just flipping through and finding the corresponding page for the photos. But it is a really, really beautiful book just physically, and I did really enjoy this book. I was surprised that I liked it as much as I did. I don't usually like historical fiction, and romance is not a genre that I generally gravitate towards at all. So this being kind of a combination of both, I'm shocked that I liked it as much as I did. But I gave this one 4 stars, and it was a really, really great introduction to Spanish translated lit, because it was one of the first translated books that I ever read. So the next one on my shelf is unread, and it is The Story of My Teeth by Valeria Lucelli, translated by Christina McSweeney. I should mention who translates all of these. This is a book that sounded very strange. I don't remember a lot about it. It does have all of these like really interesting end papers throughout, like different artworks. So I'm really interested to see how I feel about this one. So it looks like the country of origin for this one was Mexico, and it looks really, really strange. It seems to be about a late-in-life traveler whose most precious possessions are the teeth of famous people, notorious people. It sounds really, really interesting and very strange. So I'm excited about this one. I really, really like the art throughout. That's really pretty. My heater just kicked on, so if you hear that, that's what it is. I'm sorry, it's cold in here. So yeah, I think this one's gonna be pretty weird, and I'm excited to read it. Okay, next up I have a big chunk of Spanish translated stuff, and it is all from the same publishing house, Chaco Press. So I love Chaco Press. I've talked about them countless times. I did a photo shoot of all of my Chaco Press stuff. I got a free bag with my order one time, and I was like all about the photos. Basically, the Chaco Press obsession happened when I randomly found this book, which is Die My Love by Ariana Harwicks, in a independent bookstore. And since I really haven't seen many Chaco Press books in independent bookshops near me, so I could find a few of them in store, but a lot of the Chaco Press books I'm going to show you I had to buy from their website because they're based in the UK, so a lot of their books don't make it over here, and they're definitely not at places like Barnes & Noble or anything like that. So anyway, it all started with Die My Love, which was a book about a woman who's battling postpartum depression, ? It kind of feels like the yellow wallpaper. I loved this book. This was the first Chaco Press book that I read, and I read it in March of 2021. So I immediately ordered her other book, Feeble Minded, which is more about a mother and daughter and their unhealthy bond, to say the least. I'm currently waiting for the 3rd book in this trilogy-ish to be translated, and that's coming out in February, I think. This one I didn't like as much as Die My Love, but I gave this one 4 stars and this one 5 stars, and All of that is in a reading vlog, which I will put the card for right up here. But that's where it started with Chaco Press. I do actually keep them all in this like color coordinated order, which looks so pretty on the shelf. But next we have a book that actually made it onto one of my lists for Books and Bao. If you didn't know, I write book lists for a travel and translated literature blog called Books and Bao. I was writing an article on motherhood. That was the first one that I wrote about, and this one got tacked on to the end of my article. I still have not read it, but I'm very excited to read it because I know it'll fit in with themes that I'm interested in. Oh, I didn't even mention what this one was called. It's Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, translated by Frances Riddle. So moving right along, this one is about a woman in Argentina, and it is The German Room by Carla Meliandi, translated by Frances Riddle again. This was one of the ones that I originally was drawn to when I looked at Chaco Press's books. It seems very introspective and slow and meandering, which is the type of book that I really enjoy. So that is The German Room. Another Chaco Press one is Loop by Brenda Lozano, translated by Annie McDermott. So this one originates in Mexico, and I don't know a ton about it, but I don't really have to because I know I'm gonna enjoy it. Next up, I have a short story collection published by Chaco Press, and it is A Perfect Cemetery by Federico Falco, translated by Jennifer Croft. I'm very excited about this one because I'm looking forward to seeing how Chaco Press does with translated short story collections. That is a subgenre that I really like, so very excited about this one. Also, this has one of the best covers that I've ever seen. Wow. And then lastly, I have two books by Selva Almada, who I really like. The first one is The Wind That Lays Waste, which is translated by Chris Andrews. And the second one is Dead Girls, which is translated by Annie McDermott. So this one focuses on a pastor and his daughter who get stranded when their car breaks down, and they end up getting rescued by a mechanic and his son who are atheists. And it's about these two men discussing their faith or lack thereof and trying to reconcile morality with religion and all of that. And it's also about how their children find their own beliefs and identities and end up sort of being opposite of their fathers. So it's an amazing commentary on religion and faith and being a good person and what all of that entails, and I love it. I gave this one 4 stars when I read it. And I haven't read Dead Girls yet, but this is sort of a fiction slash non-fiction. I don't actually know if all the stories in this are real or not, but it's basically accounts of violence against women and I guess provides some pretty strong commentary on how women are valued. It sounds really interesting, so I'm very excited to read this one soon, and those are all of my Chaco Press books. Continuing right along with Spanish translated books, we have 2 that I have read, and these are some of my favorite translated books ever. And they are both by Mariana Enriquez, and the country of origin is Argentina. So both of these are short story collections, and they really focus on the culture and folklore of Argentina and how the real life horrors blend with the supernatural and the made up horrors and the horrors of legends, etc. So these are very scary at times, and I think they do a really good job of blending together all of these different elements of Argentine culture and folklore and political commentary and social commentary and all of these different aspects, and make really beautiful, well-rounded, beautifully written stories, and I love them, and I'm never gonna stop talking about Mariana Enriquez, and I hope more of her stuff gets translated to English so I can read it and enjoy it. So this one was a 4-star and this one was a 5-star. I love them both. I just liked this one a little bit better, but if you haven't read it and you're okay with horror, read it. All right, and my last 2 books that were translated from Spanish are The House Guest by Amparo de Villa, translated by Audrey Harris and Matthew Gleason. So this is apparently a sort of Jackson-esque horror psychological short story collection. Sounds up my alley. I just haven't had the desire to pick it up yet. I'm still excited about it, but it's just sort of sat on my shelf and I haven't picked it up because I've had way too many other things to read. But I love the cover and I will read this one soon. And the other one is a book that I've actually read. It is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, translated by Megan McDowell. So this is more of a sci-fi-ish kind of book, and it follows these little robots called Kentuckys, and there are 2 people involved with each Kentucky. You have someone who is hosting the robot in their home and being watched by the robot, and there's a person who is in the robot who gets to watch what's happening through a screen. So the connection connections between the two people are random and span across the world, so we get to see how invasive technology is and how it's used ultimately for a lot of harm. There isn't a ton of positive stories at the end of this. Most of them turn out negative, but I won't spoil it, but it is fascinating, and I give this one 4 stars. Now we sort of move into a more miscellaneous category of a bunch of different European countries. So I mentioned Fredrik Backman earlier, and I have another of his books, and this is translated from Swedish, and it is Anxious People. This was a gift from my friend for Christmas, and I don't know a ton about it. I know Bachman's writing style is pretty funny and sweet and lighthearted, so I'm not sure if I'm going to love this book, but it should be a fun reprieve from all of my dark, sinister, creepy books that I read, so yeah. Okay, I have 2 collections that are translated from the Danish, and these are Karate Chop and Wild Swims, which are both by Dorothy Noers. Honestly, I tried to start this one, and I didn't DNF it officially, but I did not enjoy it, and I think I might have to DNF it. It's unfortunate. I just was not connecting to the writing style at all. I felt really detached from it, and I didn't like it. So I feel apprehensive about going into this collection, seeing as it's the same author, but this sounds like it has slightly different themes, so maybe I'll like this, but feeling a little apprehensive about these, but we shall see. Next up, we have Higher Ground by Enki Stelling, which is translated from the German by Lucy Jones. So as far as I know, this one focuses on family and privilege, and I stumbled across it on Goodreads one day, and I loved the cover, and it sounded relatively interesting, so I picked it up. And this is the only German translated book that I own, so yeah. Next up, we have this one, which is called Armada, and I have no idea how to pronounce this author's name, so I am not going to butcher it, but that is the author. And this one is translated from Brazilian Portuguese by Edgar Garbalato. So yeah, I don't know a lot about this one. It just sounded relatively interesting and strange and weird and all of the vibes that I'm going for. And it's a very tiny, cute book. So I got this at a local bookshop and I was excited about it when I bought it, and I haven't read it yet. So we'll see when this gets read. It's not priority, but I am excited about it nonetheless. So that is Armada. And then I have a book that I have talked about before on this channel, and it is The Collection by Nina Ledger. So this one is translated from French by Laura Francis, and I read this one in November for the Bloomin' Readathon. It's very strange. It is basically about a woman who collects penises. She sleeps with different men, and she has this mental collection of all of their genitals. She doesn't remember much else about them except for that, so it's a very strange premise. But when I read this, I was surprised at how much social commentary there was and discussion of the female gaze, as well as how women who are promiscuous or live this kind of lifestyle are viewed. So there was a lot of fascinating social commentary and things discussed in this book, and it was definitely not just about what I was expecting it to be about. So even though that is a large part of this book, it's not the entire focus, and I got a lot from this besides that. So that is The Collection. I don't have enough books in each of these categories to make it its own big category, but the first one is Aquarium by Yara Shihori. I don't know how to pronounce that at all, but this one is translated from Hebrew by Todd Hasek Lowy. I don't know. So this one is apparently very stream of consciousness, and it is about 2 deaf children and their deaf family and how important deafness is to their family and how the siblings sort of create their own world. And I'm someone who is very interested in deaf culture. I wrote my capstone thesis at college about sign language and cochlear implants, and I've been very involved in the deaf community at different parts of my life. I used to have a group that I went to and did sign language with deaf people, and I took sign language classes for a long time. At one point I was fluent in sign language. I'm not anymore, unfortunately, but I do want to gain that fluency back someday. So deaf culture is something that really, really interests me, and I wanted to read another fiction book about it. So looking forward to this one. All right, moving right along, we have 2 books from Iceland. The first is Magma by Thora Hjulifsdottir. It took me forever to learn how to say that name, so I'm gonna just pat myself on the back for that one. This one is translated from the Icelandic by Magma. So this is about a young woman named Lilia who is in an abusive relationship and doesn't see it, doesn't know what's happening to her, and it's basically just about her mental health and how that deteriorates as the relationship begins to fall apart. It also highlights how difficult it is to see abuse happening in your life when you are in a relationship, and it does it so beautifully and thoughtfully and poignantly, if that's even a word, and it's amazing and perfect, and I love it, so read it. But also make sure you look up the trigger warnings if you're gonna read this, because this is a lot, but I love it. It's my favorite book of 2021 and I'm obsessed with it. Next up, we have a book that I cover bought, and it is The Blue Fox by Sian. So the back says, set against the stark backdrop of the Icelandic winter, an elusive, enigmatic fox leads a hunter on a transformative quest. So I think Iceland is so beautiful and I'm dying to go there someday. So getting to read more about the landscape and the culture is something that I'm really interested in. So honestly, I haven't found a lot of Icelandic translated books that I can read in English. So if you know of any that you think are good, please let me know because I'd love to read more. I haven't read this yet, but I'm excited to read it. All right, moving towards Asia, we have Apple and Knife by Intan Parmaditya, which was translated from the Indonesian by Stephen J. Epstein. So this one says it is inspired by horror fiction, myths, and fairy tales, and it's an unsettling ride that swerves into the supernatural to explore the dangers and power of occupying a female body in today's world. So it sounds right up my alley, and I've also never read a book that was translated from Indonesian before, so this should be very exciting. Alright, so the second to last category here is Korean literature. So I have 4 books in this category, 2 read and 2 unread. So the 2 that are unread include Almond by Won Pyung-sun, and this is translated from the Korean by Sandy Josun Lee. So this book is about a boy who is born with a brain condition that makes it hard for him to feel emotions. So it's about how he grows up with that condition, how he deals with that, how his family deals with that. It just sounds like a really, really interesting, introspective book. So I am very, very, very excited about this. This is pretty top priority in terms of reading translated lit. I'm very excited about this one. The cover is magnificent also. And then we have a book that has been considered horror, but a lot of people have been saying it's not really horror, and that is The Hole by Hee Young Pyun, translated by Sora Kim Russell. This is about a man who is woken from a coma after a car accident that took his wife, and he is trapped. He can't move, he can't do anything, he's paralyzed, and his wife's mother is taking care of him, but it's kind of sinister and dark and weird. So that sounds right up my alley, and I'm very, very excited about this one. It was on my TBR in like August of last year, and I didn't get to it obviously, but nonetheless, I'm very excited. And then the 2 books that I have read are Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju, translated by Jamie Chang. So this is about a young woman named Kim Ji-young who is basically a stand-in for every young woman in South Korea. So it just talks about all of the shit that she has to deal with as a woman in South Korea, from childhood all the way through adulthood, from all the different stages of her life, when she is an older sister to the only boy in her family and how she has to sacrifice her dreams to educate him, to her time in the workforce and sexual harassment in the workforce, to her having a husband and a child. All of those things are covered, and it is a fascinating, enraging story. But it also ties in nonfiction in that it gives you footnotes to real studies that were done in the time periods that are being discussed. So the 80s, 90s, 2000s, all of that. So it's an angry feminist text that feels deeply real because it is all rooted in reality, and it is so much emotionally to handle. It makes me so angry, and I love it. And then finally, for Korean lit, we have The Vegetarian by Han Kang, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith. This is a book about a woman who has a horrible dream and decides to go vegetarian. And even though she is the main character, we never actually hear from her. We only hear from the people who are close to her. So we hear from her husband, her sister, and her sister's husband. And it's about the ways in which other people are viewing her situation. We never get an idea of how she really feels and how she is processing the situation situation and why she's doing what she's doing. But we get to see how everyone else deals with her mental illness and her decision to be a vegetarian and all of that. So it's weird and unsettling and creepy and magnificently written, and it's all the things. So this was a 4-star for me. I really, really liked it, and if you're okay with those themes, you should read it. All right, moving along to the final section of my shelf, and it is Japanese translated lit. So I have just found a lot of Japanese translated books out in the world. So books that are translated from Spanish or Japanese are the ones that are most widely available to me in New York. So let's just jump right in. We have 2 books by Miko Kawakami. I have Breasts and Eggs and Heaven. So Breasts and Eggs is translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd, as is Heaven. So this one was in my top 10 books of 2021. I loved this one. And it's basically a punk feminist book about 2 sisters. The first section is about the one sister and her daughter. The daughter is going through puberty and hates it, and the mother is trying to look into getting breast implants. So it's about expectations for what a woman is supposed to look like and feel like and be. And the second part is also about that. It's about the other sister who has decided she doesn't want to have children and then all of a sudden starts rethinking that. So the whole book kind of talks about the social pressures that are placed on women, whether it is to be beautiful at all times, whether you've had a baby or not, regardless of your age, etc. And it's also about the push for women to have children. So like I said, it is a very feminist book, and it delves into issues that I never even really thought about, and it is amazing and wonderful, and I highly recommend. So I have not read Heaven yet, but it is more focused on 2 children who have been bullied and become friends and that relationship. So I don't know if that I'll like this as much as this one just based on themes, but there you go. Next up, I have 2 books by Hiromi Kawakami. The first one is Strange Weather in Tokyo, translated by Allison Markin Powell. And the second one is People in My Neighborhood, which is translated by Ted Goosen. So this one talks about a burgeoning relationship between a woman and one of her old school teachers. They're both adults, so don't worry about that. But it just sounded kind of interesting and not like a genre that I typically read, so I definitely want to give this a try. And this one is a short story collection, which is right up my alley as well. I love the cover to this one. So hopefully I really like this author, and I love both of these, but we shall see. Next up, we have another short story collection, and it is Where the Wild Ladies Are by Ayoku Matsuda, translated by Polly Barton. So this is a collection of short stories which are based on Japanese fairy tales and folklore. So each story is a retelling of a fairy tale or myth. So most of the stories talk about the supernatural and ghosts and all of that. So it does educate you on Japanese myths, and there are little sections in the back which give the real myth, so you can kind of compare how the author has changed the myth and what the myth is originally like. And it was so much fun to read. I loved every minute of it. Also, this copy is so buttery soft and floppy and beautiful, and I love it. Next up, we have 2 books by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. One I have read and one I haven't read. The one I've read is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is translated from the Japanese by Jeffrey Trusolot. So this is about a cafe where if you sit in a certain seat, you can time travel to any point at which you've been in the cafe. And the caveat is that you have to drink all of your coffee before it gets cold, otherwise you won't be able to come back to the present. So this follows 4 different characters. It's sort of 4 little stories within the book, and it kind of goes over why these characters want to time travel. So it's less about the mechanics of the time travel and more about the reasoning that these people want to time travel. So it ends up being kind of emotional because it's about visiting loved ones who have died or going to the future to meet people you'll never be able to meet. It is a lot emotionally, but it is very cute and sweet and fun. And the other one is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe. And this one is basically just short stories within the world of this book. So I haven't read this one yet, but I'm very excited to read that. And those are my books by Kawaguchi. Almost done. We have a few books that I haven't read. The first one is Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sokigawa, translated by Allison Watts. So I believe this just focuses on cooking and family, and it sounds like a very sweet, wholesome read. So looking forward to that. I also love this cover. It's so cute. So another book that I haven't read is Territory of Light by Yuko Tsushima, translated by Geraldine Harcourt. So this is basically just about a young mother and her struggles, which is something that I'm really interested in. That's right up my alley. So I think I'll really enjoy this one. It's also very short, and that's definitely also right up my alley. So looking forward to reading this one. The last book that I haven't read is The Guest Cat by Tashiki Harade. This was translated by Eric Sellen, and this is just about a couple and a cat that shows up one day, and that's all I know about it. Sounds cute, sounds fun, so I'm gonna read it. And then finally, we have 2 Japanese translated books that I have read. The first one is The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imimura. This one was translated by Lucy North, and this one basically just follows this woman who is the woman in the yellow cardigan, and she's basically just watching or stalking, whatever you want to call it, this woman who she calls the woman in the purple skirt. So basically she follows this woman around, she learns her routine, she learns everything she can about this woman, and is basically just watching that situation unravel. And it was fascinating, it was spooky and weird and unsettling. I did enjoy this, but it wasn't like a favorite, so I gave it between 3 and 4 stars. It was definitely worth reading, but not something that I think I will come back to, honestly. And then finally, we have Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, translated by Ginny Tapley Takimori. So this one follows a woman named Kiko who has been working in a convenience store for many, many years and really doesn't want to leave. She is a cog in the machine and she doesn't want to be anything else. And she thinks that the ambitiousness that everyone seems to have is ridiculous. She doesn't understand it. She wants to just do what she's good at and be comfortable in that. She doesn't want to get married. She doesn't want to have children. She doesn't want to have a prestigious degree or a career or anything like that. She just wants to be a cog in the machine. So it's about capitalism, it's about the hustle culture that we all experience and are a part of, and it challenges the idea that we have to be and do everything perfectly. So the narrator in this book, to me, is very unlikable and hard to connect to, and that was really the only thing that I didn't like about this book. So I really enjoy unlikable narrators, but this one was just so far removed from anything that I could relate to that it made it hard to connect to her. So now that my voice is dying, that is all of the translated books that I own. So here they all are on the top shelf. I love how this shelf looks. It's very aesthetic. I love it. If you've read any of these, please let me know. I'd love to talk to you about them. And if you have any other recommendations for translated books, also leave that in the comments. I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.